We start with our prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the sunshine. Thank you for all these people who have gathered for this meeting. We ask that we keep grace in our hearts when we meet and try and help the city and each other. We ask that you get us all home safely. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, ready for the roll call?
Dr. Ash?
Here.
Tom Corman?
Here.
William Ellis?
Here.
Carl Thurman?
Here.
Trevor Sager?
Here.
Larry DeMoss?
Here.
Full house. Oh, sorry, sorry. All right, we need to approve the minutes of the February 24, 2025 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in
Approved.
favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes.
All right. All righty, that leaves us open for the presentation from Baker Tilly, which we're all excited to hear. We probably have some questions for you outside your presentation about RDCs and your history working with them, and yeah.
If you just say next slide, I'll move it for you. That'll work.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the introduction. My name is Sam Schrader with Baker Tilly Business
William.
Advisors.
I don't think I still wasn't there.
There you go.
Particularly on the redevelopment side of things. Hopefully this is a valuable presentation to you all, and if you do have questions along the way, please do not hesitate to stop me. There we go, okay. Got it. So this evening, going to talk TIF 101, what is TIF, how is it used, how can Ellettsville deploy it effectively, and, encourage and realize a lot of growth opportunities. Again, stop me as we go along the way here, but just kind of an introduction to TIF. What is TIF? You're going to hear me use the abbreviation, but it's an acronym that stands for Tax Increment Financing. It kind of goes hand in hand with economic development and redevelopment initiatives, and it's a tool that captures new assessed value from the property taxes generated by new developments in a designated area. So that capture can be increases in both real and personal property. I believe as it currently stands, the two areas that you just completed establishing only are going to capture real property. There's always opportunities to change that in the future. But typically, TIF focuses on commercial and industrial property growth. However, there are now residential TIF tools that some communities are deploying. It's actually, more popular than ever right now with the emphasis on the housing inventory throughout the state. But the purpose of TIF to its core is really, kind of twofold. One, to finance incentives focused on private investment into a community, and two, the public infrastructure needs of a community, and kind of how sometimes those fit hand in hand. Obviously its use is focused on encouraging orderly growth in specific areas. Sometimes that means blighted areas. One thing to note here, whether you're inside or outside, or you're taxpayer inside or outside of a TIF area, you're paying the same in taxes. There's no additional tax levied on those that are inside the boundaries of a TIF area. That's sometimes a misconception that we hear. If you want to go to the next slide, oh no, you're actually good here, Noel. So common uses of TIF. Again, some of this is going to sound repetitive, but economic development is at the helm of TIF use. And that, again, kind of is focused in a couple different buckets: the private investment, and then the infrastructure development and local improvements also needed to support growth in a community. You also can think of TIF in a sense of helping with quality of place projects. So ways to, make a community more appealing to its current residents, future residents. That can mean, again, additional public safety infrastructure. It can mean park improvements, park projects. That can mean projects encouraging or facilitating improvements for school corporation. There's really just a lot of flexibility that comes with TIF and TIF spending, which is what makes it such an important tool for communities to utilize effectively. One thing to note here, all projects have to be in serving or benefiting the economic development area in terms of kind of how the TIF spending works, and they also must be outlined in the area's redevelopment plan, which was approved through the process of establishing the TIF areas that you all just went through. I'm one slide behind you, Noel. No, you can keep it here, it's fine. But again, kind of just to reiterate, I'm on slide 4 if you guys are following along in your packet. Again, these are just some of the other common uses: blight redevelopment, and then supporting education and other taxing units through capital projects, educational programs. Some other permitted uses throughout the state we see is job training, efficiency projects, which refers somewhat to consolidating of local services, and now even police and fire capital and operating expenditures can be used and paid from TIF. Question, Mike?
So operating expenses, we talked about it at our department head meetings. Thought it'd be a good time to ask. Salaries for safety officers?
That's a tricky one.
How tricky do we have to be?
I've seen salaries being paid from TIF revenues for employees directly serving redevelopment purposes, so planners.
If you can tie it together.
Yeah, it would be more of a legal question on that end. I can definitely look into getting an answer for you, Darla. I don't know if you know the answer to that off the top of your head, but in terms of salaries for public safety, yeah, it's a newer concept too in general, but.
We'll be interested in that, especially with some of the bills that may or may not get passed. And in fact, so one of our TIF areas, the west side, we're looking to build a station there. So obviously it'll have to be manned, or if you will. And so I guess my question is, initially the station would be there, and of course it would cover the TIF, but is it allowable that they come out of their TIF and actually, for a large fire or something, work somewhere else as well? So that's kind of the tricky question we'd like to know.
In public safety, I think in some cases can be easier to draw a nexus between areas within or outside the boundaries of an economic development area, because the way it's defined is in serving or benefiting. So there's kind of ways to kind of plug that all together. But that does make it a little bit of a nuance. So that's why I'd like to, I don't have a definitive answer for you. But
for our town, I think it's a really big question to ask. Do you have anything to say about it? Okay.
Because I think the argument can be made too, is that if not for this TIF and the growth, we wouldn't need those services.
yeah, that's fair.
Thanks.
Yeah, good question. Moving on here to slide 5. These next few slides are more of mechanic-based and kind of tell the story of, the layers of a TIF area, how it's captured, how it's calculated. So right here, let's picture the black boundary here is the boundaries of the town of Ellettsville. And within the town, obviously, you all have the jurisdiction to establish economic development areas to serve various uses. Within the town, that economic development area here in this diagram, or for purposes of this diagram, is outlined in red. So you can have several economic development areas that span, the boundaries of the town. And then within the economic development area is what we call the TIF allocation area. That's your orange portion here. Those are the specific parcels that you set, as opportunities for growth to capture the revenues from those areas. And so it's only within the allocation area where the TIF revenues are generated, but they can serve or be spent on projects within the boundaries of the economic development area, or that are in serving and benefiting the economic development area. So you can sometimes see an economic development area that has several allocation areas. In our example here, we showed that those aren't coterminous. I think they may be in the circumstance of the areas you just established. It can go either way. So to just kind of illustrate the layers, we showed it in this manner.
So we had a question that came up during a previous meeting. Some of the school district, or not the school district, some of the school buildings are within our designated West TIF. They would be the non-orange area, presumably, that they're not.
Correct.
There's not, okay.
Yeah, the white portion that's outlined in red, but not capturing
right,
taxes.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It might be kind of tricky question. Can you tell us kind of the 101 on how do you do a TIF within a TIF, and why would you do that?
Why you'd have like several allocation areas.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of reasons you would want to do it. I mean, if you had specific projects that you were capturing revenues and pledging them to certain obligations, you may want to have one allocation area here that sits on 3 parcels that are going to a specific project, because when you pledge those revenues, that's what starts the clock on those revenues. May not want to start the clock on, the west side of the allocation area, or the redevelopment area, I should say. So it's kind of in some sense, a timing strategy to, utilize the full life of the TIF area.
So would you use it like if you were trying to lure somebody to come here with real good paying jobs, you might use a TIF within a TIF there, where that project would be an inner TIF, if you will?
Yeah,
And then you could, if you're trying to parlay on getting them to come here,
That's a
Is
prime
that-
example.
okay.
Yep. If
So
you had,
the infrastructure in that part of the, okay,
Yep.
got it.
yep, yeah, so the infrastructure that would serve that specific development or building, or, whatever they needed to locate there, that's that example. Yep. Moving on to the next slide here. This kind of takes the next step in showing kind of the life of a TIF area. So when you guys established those 2 allocation areas at the prior meeting, you had, set those specific parcels for each allocation area. And at the time of that establishment, they obviously had an assessed value associated with them. That's what we call the base assessed value, and that's going to stay with that parcel and continue to go to the overlapping taxing units tax base like it currently was throughout the entire life of the TIF area. So where that assessed value was currently, going in terms of, all these other taxing units budgeting with that assessed value, that does not change. It's only, and that's kind of that's our yellow baseline here, right? It's only the growth above that base assessed value at establishment that's captured by the redevelopment commission and thus turns into TIF revenues. So that's our blue portion here. Obviously, the growth is never as linear as we, have illustrated, but the thought is as those revenues come in, you continue to reinvest in other, areas, and that cycle continues.
So theoretically, we was talking, again, at the department head meeting, we were talking about the dangers of if we could use TIF money as salaries after year 20 or 25, whatever, you would be on the hook for those salaries, and you would not have the TIF money anymore. But theoretically, I don't know what the property taxes are going to be 25 years, but theoretically that AV could take over paying for the salaries. And a company like you, can they figure out if that'll even work? I mean, is that how it's supposed to work?
That's not how it works. works. And
Okay.
that's often the misconception of capturing TIF. So if you kind of look at this graphic here, we get to the expiration of the area. Now that growth goes to the overlapping taxing units along with the base. What that's going to do is that's going to increase the tax bases of the overlapping taxing units, right? But all the overlapping taxing units are capped with the levy growth quotient. That's not going to change. So I think right now it's at 4%, right? So even if you had $1 billion of assessed value added to the tax base at an expiration of a TIF area, you can only grow by 4%. So what that growth does, assessed value increases, that puts downward pressure on tax rates, assuming that all units are operating at their maximum levies, which if they're not, they're leaving money on the table. So, I think it's a safe assumption that they are. So that's kind of a misconception. It's not like a dollar for dollar trade-off. It's really a shift in assessed value, not revenues.
So it might just bring the tax rate down.
That's the most likely outcome. No new revenues.
Okay, good to know.
Yep, you're getting ahead of me. That's a great question.
Sorry.
So,
But I guess you could say it would be a revenue increase from when you first started the TIF, because the AV's increased. You use the TIF money to pump the AV up in those areas. So you are gonna see an increase, but just it's not like going to, when the TIF ends, it goes to everyone in the town. It's gonna be spread out to everybody that has a finger in the pie.
you'll realize the TIF revenues, the redevelopment commission will realize the TIF revenues while the area is outstanding. The area ends, the revenues don't get dispersed, the assessed value does. So again, that's where, you could be generating $1 million of TIF, the area expires. That doesn't mean there's a new $1 million of TIF going to the county, the school, the town. It's really just that assessed value, and again, with that relationship between,
Based on whatever the current rate is.
it's really just gonna
not
put
temporary.
downward pressure on the tax rate.
Now, what happens to any money left in that TIF when it expires?
It'll sit there until, it can be spent on, again, all the eligible projects that are defined in the redevelopment plan.
So if we have something that's still left over,
It
the
doesn't go away.
redevelopment commission could still use that?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
I'm trying to catch up on this, so a lot of good information. So once the TIF expires, the companies or the corporations or who's paying that tax just goes away.
There's no additional tax that they're paying. They're paying the same tax rate whether they were in or outside the TIF area. Now, an incentive that you provided to them maybe would expire. And again, that's a whole nother kind of discussion, but their tax rate is no different whether or not they're in the allocation area. That actually kind of takes me to this next slide here, where, your captured assessed value, that's the portion going to the redevelopment commission. That's the growth, right, in AV. Multiply that by the tax rate, that's how you get your TIF revenues. That base assessed value does the same thing. So essentially, in the scenario that you outlined, that whole, cylinder would be going to, instead of a portion going to the redevelopment commission, the whole portion is just going to the overlapping taxing units in terms of AV. So tax rate's the same, nothing really changes at that point, again, unless there's an incentive that's expiring, which could mean, property tax abatement, it could mean a TIF bond of some nature, but otherwise, life just goes on.
The TIF is pretty much invisible for the taxes of anybody in it that they're paying. They're gonna reap benefits from it coming back, but they're not like getting a tax break or higher taxes because they're in a TIF. They're still paying the same.
Yeah, exactly, yep. Yeah, the benefit would be the projects that it's,
Right.
being
That's
used
the
for.
benefit, yeah,
Right.
not,
Yep, or incentive.
Right.
Again, depending on, if you're going down that road. So, nothing else. I think we covered this slide from that question. One thing I just want to note that TIF can't capture a school referendum rate or fire district rate or any fire territory rate established after 2022. So, if you had one of those in place in one of your TIF areas, it would just only go to that taxing unit. It would not be captured as TIF.
it's the same for fire district too.
Yep.
Okay.
This next slide just kind of outlines the term of an allocation area. So legislation has changed over the years to define, what's the life of a TIF area. As it currently stands, so this is applicable to your TIF areas unless legislation changes, which it inevitably will, right? But your current TIF areas will expire 25 years after the date that the first long-term obligation has the revenues from that area pledged towards. So again, that would probably mean some kind of bond or loan or anything of that nature. But that's the date that actually establishes the 25-year life, not the date that you establish the TIF area. If you were to establish a residential TIF area, it'd be the same thing, it's just 20 years. But that's how legislation currently defines an allocation area. You can end an area whenever you want. You guys have that power to do that. If for some reason, that'd be a benefit to the community.
Residential TIFs are unusual, right?
Aren't.
Are.
They're new. They're the new thing, right? So I think that might be the next slide. It is. You're reading my mind. I'm telling you. Residential TIF. So there was legislation put in place back in 2019. It's been amended several times to get us to where we currently are. But again, we see it utilized in communities throughout the state to support developers bringing in, dense housing to communities that need it. There are also there's some other tools that the state has employed. The Indiana Finance Authority has a residential infrastructure loan program. So if you had a residential TIF and had, projects that were going to serve the development of a residential TIF, they have a loan program similar to like an SRF program where they offer you it is a low interest rate to kind of deploy that project and to continue to incentivize housing development in communities. But yeah, it's relatively new. I wouldn't say it's really uncommon anymore. We do see it in several communities. There used to be more stipulations in place that made it a little bit harder for communities, or I should say redevelopment commissions, to establish them, but those have been lifted. You used to need to have school approval and some additional resolutions adopted. Now that's not in place, so it's essentially a similar process that you just went through, and that's currently how they'll be handled through 2027 as legislation currently reads.
And so if you have strong home building in your area, it's not anything you'd really want to utilize.
Yeah, I mean, unless you had a developer that was coming in and building 300 homes, but if that's not the case, then, apartments are treated as commercial in terms of TIF, so that's capturable anyways. It's not a unique type of TIF. So if you're just looking at normal residential growth, I don't know that it's necessarily an effective tool, but you can capture those revenues.
It's good to know about, but I don't believe we'll be making a move that way.
Especially the average housing growth being less than 1%. That would be, that would, I think, be rare for us for the time being.
It limits your revenues up front just because you have to think about, the assessed value with all the deductions, and then, you're probably pretty limited. You're going to capture that initial home being built, and you'll capture that, moving forward, but there's probably not going to be anything else.
So why are people doing residential TIFs then? What's the advantage of that?
They're capturing revenues that are being, in some circumstances, pledged to developers to build, the project. It's a way for them to try to get, that housing inventory up. I think some communities are more limited and don't have maybe the location or infrastructure in place to make it a desirable place for residential developers to do that. And so that gives them an opportunity to do that. So sometimes we'll see, you can range in dollar amount, but some relatively low, borrowing amounts or loan amounts to facilitate whatever growth they can.
So if Ellettsville wasn't growing less than 1% over 3 years, we'd want to do it because we'd want to bring growth out to potentially bring in new homes. But since we have a few projects going on, it's not a consideration, or?
No, it just doesn't work for us because residential growth is pretty strong here, and it does affect the schools. And so, you
It's not a
know,
positive for the schools.
in small towns where maybe the water or sewer infrastructure, just to use those, were in bad need of upgrading, even to do a project like 300 homes, you know, you might parlay with the builder and say, we'll use the TIF, pay you back, you bond, get the water and sewer in, and we'll pay you back through that TIF. I mean, you might want to use it in a scenario like that, but we have strong growth here and a strong desire for people to build here, and our infrastructure is in a, such that it's just probably a tool we would never,
From a residential standpoint.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we are
yeah.
wanting to do it from a
yeah.
industrial standpoint, commercial, so we can bring more businesses. Okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's good to know about,
yeah,
but,
okay.
Now, we see communities where, you know, you think of like some of the donut counties in Indianapolis, where developer will come and want to invest over $1 billion in infrastructure, or in housing inventory and infrastructure, and community thinks about, you know, what does that mean for our schools? How do we support, you know, all these new students? And there's ways to, you know, say, you know, we're going to have X go towards infrastructure, and we're going to have X be, you know, going straight towards whatever the school needs to facilitate that growth. You know, because a development like that can make it a more attractive, you know, community for everyone. So that's probably like the, you know, the prime example of where it makes sense, but you know, it's just a resource out there. You know, if something comes across or comes knocking on Ellettsville's door in the future,
So
you never know.
potentially would be a way to funnel more money to the schools.
It can be,
If the
yeah.
community was growing, but we're growing anyway, so we don't need to do that?
it doesn't seem like it'd be high on our priorities of, I mean, I've always said, you know, we have this list of things we'll use the TIF money for. We will, at some point, I think this board, their real work will start when they have to decide which way you go with that money. So there's enough, you know, I always say there's 5 cows in a 4-cow feeder, so we're always going to have to decide what we're not going to do. So in our situation, having a residential TIF probably is not how we feed the cows. I always like to get cows in.
All right, next slide here. We kind of started talking about schools. It's a good segue into this next portion of the presentation. But one question we often get is, you know, what's the impact of TIF on the overlapping taxing units? Sometimes this is in opposition from taxing units. Does TIF take away funds from other taxing units? And we typically lean on what's called the but-for test, which essentially outlines that, you know, if the increased assessed value from new developments would not occur but for the TIF being in place to either incentivize that infrastructure up front, or incentives to a specific developer, then the development wouldn't happen anyway, and there would be no change to the tax base, right? So again, we talked about it. There's a benefit to the overlapping taxing units from TIF areas that's just delayed in nature and occurs usually at the end of an allocation area. But there's also ways we're going to talk about in a few slides where, while the area is outstanding, you can also facilitate capital projects that serve other types of units. But again, this kind of leads us back to our prior conversation. It's important to note that when that TIF area ends, that if that TIF area is generating $1 million of revenue from the captured assessed value, it does not mean that the overlapping taxing units are going to begin to realize that $1 million of revenue. Instead, they're going to have an increase in assessed value, which is going to put that downward pressure on tax rates. So it's really a trade-off of assessed value rather than captured revenue.
Are there diagrams you guys use where it shows the flow of money and how it trickles back down as tax? Is there diagrams like that?
You're saying you want to see like what it would look like when a TIF area expired, if they're...
Well, not even necessarily for a TIF, even just how taxes move, you know, they're collected and how do they move back towards us, and
Yeah,
I mean, sometimes it's hard to digest, even when you kind of know how it works, it's hard to digest. You know, it's almost like a organizational chart where when the taxes come back, they go to the fire units and
Sure.
they go to this town and this, that, and the other. So I just wondered if,
We could come up with something. So one thing that comes to mind is honestly the tax impact statement that I know Noel put in your packets. The last page is essentially somewhat of that diagram where it shows, here's the current state of all the taxing units in terms of tax rates, net assessed values, and your levies in place. And essentially it shows in terms of establishing the TIF that there's no impact because again, without the TIF, the theory is there's no growth otherwise, right? But what we can also show is, you know, if using that diagram, we can essentially show, hey, if you had a development that came into place in an area that wasn't in a TIF area and say it generated, you know, $100 million of assessed value, what would that mean in terms of new revenue? Again, I think what you're going to see is it's more so a reduction in tax rates. There are a couple funds that are what we call rate-driven funds, so their tax rate is kind of set in place by legislation and statute, but that's something we can diagram if there's a specific scenario that you'd like to see.
picture's worth 1,000 words.
I get it. All right, next slide here, slide 11. So we talked about, you know, again, TIF can benefit those overlapping taxing units in a delayed nature. There's also methods of accelerating that benefit. You know, one would be a community can only capture a portion of the assessed value that they're entitled to. They could decide to pass through incremental assessed value. And one of the responsibilities of this board will be on an annual basis, you have to make a pass-through determination. I believe it's due on June 15th, and that's something that we are happy to assist with. But essentially, it looks at, you know, if there are, and this is kind of down the road, this is once your TIF area is becoming established and you're generating revenues. But if for some reason in a given year you don't have projects earmarked that would utilize all the TIF revenues, you have the ability to shift that assessed value to the overlapping taxing units. It may not be the most efficient use of the dollars because, again, like I said, that's not a dollar-for-dollar impact, in which case you could also look towards, you know, funding capital projects for other units or have some type of interlocal agreements. You know, again, that's kind of where we're leading into at the tail end of this presentation. But there are ways that you can, you know, decide to, you know, facilitate those relationships early on. So again, that kind of brings us to one of the last portions here, cross-unit collaboration with TIF, and specifically schools, because again, that's the relationship between TIF and schools is always such a hot topic. But TIF revenues can be used to support schools. You can you know, set aside 15% of revenues for educational programs, but you can also use TIF to support educational-focused capital projects. So the next couple slides here are specific examples, so you can kind of have something to look back at and see what other communities have done to, you know, again, just provide benefit to the schools. So in the town of Plainfield, they've utilized TIF to be the repayment source on a bond that funded a transportation center for all their buses. They also built a few years ago a higher educational facility called Made at Plainfield. I believe it was a $30 million project paid solely from TIF. You know, you can see Whitley County contributed $7.5 million to building improvements. We see like technology grants that some communities provide, you know, at a certain dollar amount for a certain period of time. And, you know, that school corporation then comes and presents to the redevelopment commission on an annual basis and tells them where those dollars are going. You know, the list kind of goes on and on. The city of Jeffersonville here on the next slide, they have an expansion area that when it was established, they set into place an agreement that said 10% of those revenues from that area will go directly to the schools. But they also, you know, look at projects in real time to see where they can assist. They just, the high school just built state-of-the-art aquatic center that was, you know, going to be the new standard for even the whole Louisville metro area. They contributed $1 million towards that. So again, there's so many ways that, you know, once those revenues start coming in, you decide where the best use of those projects or where those funds are, and you can kind of deploy as necessary.
So I assume it's not something we have to worry about right now, because I was trying to figure out how they figured out how to allocate 600,000. So they had to do that farther down in the TIF
Absolutely. Yeah.
evolution.
Yeah, you need to have some of those developments that you're expecting come online first, figure out what they're gonna generate before you're coming close to making those kinds of decisions. But that's, again, the benefit of TIF is that those decisions are available to you.
Can you do just theoretical numbers, like 10% will go towards school projects versus a number amount? And is this 15% for the educational programs? Is that 15% for both educational programs and capital projects, or does capital projects have a different funding level than the educational projects?
The capital projects is kind of the more intended use of the funds. So I think that's why, for whatever reason, there's a cap on the programming. But yes, you have that flexibility to make that decision on a percentage or dollar amount, whatever suits the community or your community the best. And this, you know, this is synonymous with, you know, if you have sewer infrastructure that you need, those funds can obviously go towards that. That's public infrastructure that's going to serve, you know, the community. So again, it's just a flexible tool when used, you know, correctly for communities.
Well, I'm sure Dr. Sanders probably told you about our plan for the Health Careers Center that we're trying to develop. And that sounds like something that we would definitely be interested in talking with this commission about as a school corporation. That seems like it would be exactly what this is calling for.
Does anyone have any questions on this? My question I have for you, which maybe someone else may have this question too, is I love this idea of trying to figure out where we're going to spend it, how it's going to increment and all that stuff. And I do get the idea if you don't establish the TIF and put the money in the TIF, the assessment won't go up, so there'll be no money to collect. I get that. But where do we get, where do other RDCs get started on what is our next step to get things going? I mean, we got a lot of great ideas on where to start it and what to do with it once we get it, but there's a hole in the middle.
I think you're asking, when's the money coming?
Well, how do we facilitate getting that going?
Well, so on the west side, for instance, you have, I think the estimate of the, after 10-year build out of the Harmon Farm is like $330 million. So you can, depending on how fast or how slow they go, depending on the economy and mortgage rates, how fast they grow out, you can kind of project that there's going to be $330 million build out. That you can, there are, you know, they're going to start building houses this fall, so they have phases, so you can kind of follow along with their plan to project when you would have money. The Smithfield project across the street, they're going to start maybe a year later, and I don't know that it'll mirror the same amount of money, but you can kind of make some assumptions. And so I think with our accountants, I'm pretty sure we can say, hey, can we kind of figure out a plan for spending based on the assessed value going up? We know there's projects out there, and so some of the other properties that we annex that are desirable, like for large entities that might want to put in a life science project, or there was a mention of an AI center, and just, you know, whatever. Once those hit, then you can start planning. Because they'll give you an amount that they think this is going to cost us, just like when they built Key, we knew how much that was going to cost.
So Baker Tilly will be the people that will start to tell us
Yeah.
when because we got a lot of ideas. I like that. We got some things how to make these ideas happen, but we need to, there's something missing in the middle about connecting the dots. So
Well, it's called time.
yeah.
And I think You had talked about the possibility of visiting some communities that had done this, and maybe some of these that they use, you know, what did you do, Plainfield? When did you start, and when did you start seeing the money come in, and that kind of thing? I could see that being very helpful. Greencast wouldn't be
When
far.
you're poor, you don't have to fight over money because there isn't. Right. But once you get money, then that's when you
Yeah.
start deciding how, I said fight over.
We want to fix that problem. We want to see growth.
Yeah. So, you know, even like the downtown TIF, if we're successful in getting a riverfront, riverfront district, and we finally get some hotels, we've got a couple people that are intending to build new structures in that as well. One thing begets another, you get a couple anchors in there, and so, you know, the downtown area could be just as healthy as the west side. And so you just, you know, it's a gradual process. And sometimes it's not a gradual process. Sometimes the board comes in, lands, and takes over. And, you know, and it's just, boom, it's there. I mean, I'm sure that happens to some towns and cities, but we're growing fast, but we're not growing that fast yet. Although if you think about the two projects west of town, their assessed value after their build out is equal to what our assessed value is now, so that's quite some growth.
But, I mean, a considerable portion of that will be residential.
What
Yeah.
is, well, either one.
Considerable, yes, but there's also gonna be
Okay.
pretty decent commercial
Okay,
in both.
good.
And we won't be capturing any of the residential.
Right, I know, that's why I was thinking, 330 million sounds like a lot of money, but is that,
Yeah.
is that all the houses, or is it just the commercial? If it's just commercial, that's a heck of a lot of money.
I can tell you, commercial won't be his first phase.
Oh, yeah, I
So
wouldn't
the
think.
first phase is gonna be all residential.
Sure.
But once again, that, you know, when you get density, then you have to have services.
Sure.
And when you have to have services, then you have to have backup commercial services to even, you know, the small businesses, if you will. And you get a couple of block buildings that have a national chain or something, and I mean, that's just kind of the natural progression of things. And there's no reason to believe that won't happen on the west side.
Yeah, so as soon as you know, specific projects or potential projects, the development scope, the investment being made, you know, we can run numbers that would estimate the revenue that would be available from those
So
projects.
how do we facilitate, sitting here, because it's time, I know you like time, I don't like time, I like to make things happen. So where do we start getting the idea of meeting or getting things out there that we're doing this here, we're making this area right for companies who want to come into it, where they will start to come to us and say, hey, we'd like to be part of what's going on, or.
Great question. So, we work through the BEDC, Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. Of course, I say that E stands for Ellettsville, Bloomington-Ellettsville Development Corporation. But anyway, so we're a member, and they are continuously working at bringing jobs and businesses into this community that, you know, lifts all boats. And so they're out there pounding the pavement. I mean, they work on a regional and a national level, even though they're from here, and just jump in there if you want at any time. But also, you know, we just met with a public relations firm, and so the town's going to hire somebody to kind of, and we're going to go through a branding, and so, you know, we're you know, if we're going to go from being a vegetable stand town to maybe a Kroger's one of these days, and so, but you got to put together the, you know, selling it and advertising and this, that, and the other. So all of that is in play right now, just so you know.
No, I get marketing's pretty important. So I'm getting ahead, so as far as where we sit here, this is not something we need to get involved in. That's something that the council is working with out of Bloomington, and they will bring that stuff this direction. It's not something that,
Well,
I want to
yes.
make sure we're not sleeping on something that we need to be doing to help facilitate this.
Well, the answer is yes and no, because you're all community members, business people, board members, you know, so you've got that mix of why you would want to be interested in this. And plus, you know, if you're loyal to your town, you just want to see growth. We've got school board members here. So there's a reason to always be involved and be kind of pushing it. I'm not for sitting around and see what happens, but anyway, you should be always involved in it. It's amazing that a lot of people don't come to these meetings. It's amazing that a lot of people don't come to the town board meetings. But we got cats, so a lot of people do catch up on what's going on and not have, you know, and be able to stay afloat of what's going on. But it's amazing more people aren't interested in what is going on. For me, I can't believe it. Anyway.
I'd be happy to make some comments.
It'd be great.
My name's Clark Griner with the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. We don't just cover Bloomington. Our name kind of belies what we actually do. We cover all of Monroe County, and we also work on a regional basis as well as with the state. So we field lots of different inquiries that come in from the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and we work with them. They may actually a site selector. Those are the folks. They're kind of like a group that specializes in identifying location selection decisions for businesses out there. And these could be big businesses. For instance, we recently worked on the Simtra Biopharma one here. We did an expansion there. I think it was over $150 million in revenue. Those projects accelerate quite quickly and can go from just no investments up to that $150 million over several years. And that's really what starts to populate some of the money in some of these funds because of how the assessed value increases so rapidly, which gives you funds. And that TIF allows you to isolate those funds so you can, the RDC specifically gets to use those in those TIF districts and how they're applied. We are working with various different site selectors in identifying potential businesses that we refer to as traded sector businesses. And a traded sector business is somebody that not only brings money and jobs to the community, but also exports money and product out. So not just to the state, but also regionally, multi-state, nationally, and even globally, internationally. So if you look at some of those companies, obviously Cook Medical is one of them, Simtra Biopharma, Novo Nordisk is one of them, Phoenix Closure. They have multiple large sites and typically have a number of employees, you know, at those jobs. KE is one of them as well. So we're out looking for those types of different opportunities. And I can say I've actually made several requests for information, responses for some of these locations and sites out here that we have in Ellettsville. It takes a little bit of time. It is a competitive process. A lot of times when we're working on this, we're not just competing with the neighbors next door, but we're competing on, if somebody says we want a Midwest location, we could be competing against Ohio, you know, Michigan, Illinois, those various different states. So those are the things we really try to pay attention to. We try to identify, we look at the comprehensive plan for Ellettsville, we understand what's going on with that, and then we actually go out and make an appeal to those specific businesses that are growing. And we look at different sides. So we're looking at the life sciences segment, which would include medical devices. We'd also be looking at biopharma solutions. Advanced manufacturing would be one. Technology, which could be machine learning, AI, different things like that. Even defense, the defense sector and aerospace would be some of the key areas. And we don't just look at those businesses to say what can they bring it, but we're also trying to look for the future, you know, microelectronics and some of those things that are going to bring us into the future because jobs and conditions and the economy change, so we want to pay attention to that. So we're always looking for it. So if you guys and gentlemen have specific interests and industries you're looking at, let us know. You can come through Michael or Denise, or you can come directly to us and let us know what those are, and we're happy to kind of keep our eyes and ears open. But we are out looking at that. Jen Pearl, for instance, the president of the BET, is going to be down in Orlando. I know that's a tough assignment here, March 12th through the 14th, but going to the National Site Selector Guild. And these are folks that specialize in identifying businesses that are looking for expansion or growth locations or opportunities, and these are those people. So we are fostering relationships with those folks so that we can start to really present what we have and make them aware of our community and the wonderful things that are happening in Ellettsville and in Monroe County overall. So we work very diligently at that, very hard, and happy to answer any questions on that. But we see TIF as a favorable thing because, again, it's part of it's a arrow in your quiver, your toolbox, so to speak, to be able to attract these companies and these different organizations. And then we also look at that, and then we try to look at the culture of the community and what they're interested in, and we try to model that. And it is a very highly competitive process. So as you can imagine, companies that are bringing millions, and in some cases hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in certain cases to a community, there's a lot of competition out there. People want those. They want good paying jobs. And really what our role is to try to bring prosperity to the community. And we do that through good paying jobs and good businesses coming in town. So
to kind of get back to Sam's presentation, thank you.
you bet.
Thank you.
And I will say, we spent, 4 or 5 hours last week with Denise and Jen, and we come up with a worksheet for what do we want in our community, and it's kind of open-ended, but we'll be sharing that soon enough when we kind of polish it up, that you can look at it, and it'll make you ask questions of yourself and your community of what do you want, what don't you, and what don't you want is probably more important than what you do want. So anyway, let's get back to Sam.
I will say real quick, though, if a pizza emporium is not part of your plan,
Pardon?
if a pizza emporium is, one thing I always hear, we need more pizza places. That may be sarcasm, though, I'm not sure.
Too bad they don't have a pizza tip.
Sorry for the break in your presentation.
Yeah. For future TIF area names, that's not a bad name.
Yeah.
I think we're probably the highest per capita pizza population in the state, maybe the country.
Sorry to interrupt your presentation, but I appreciate the insight, because I think that's very important also.
It was a good one.
And I still have stuff off the back of that, but let's get back here, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Didn't interrupt anything. And honestly, that kind of comes to the conclusion of what I had. My last slide here is just some reporting requirements. So, now that you have these TIF areas established, the state's going to put you to work to continue to monitor them, and it's really a way for them to make sure that TIF is being deployed in the manner that it's intended to be. So these are all reporting requirements that we can assist you with. I'm going to just kind of leave it as a for-your reference for now. And again, if there's any other questions, my information along with Matt Eckerly's are at the end of this presentation. You do not hesitate to reach out to us, give us a call, shoot us an email, and we're happy to help in whatever way we can.
So I have a question. You mentioned early on, why did we not use personal property? Why did we not include that in a TIF? And is that something you can add later, or?
Yeah, so it's intended to be structured towards a specific project. So any allocation area can have what's called a designated taxpayer you would then capture their depreciable personal property. Again, I believe that you could only have one, as it currently stands, you can only have one designated taxpayer per allocation area. So it's really going to be a situation where that project gets located here. You've talked to somebody, they're going to invest X amount of dollars in equipment or whatever it may be. We would run that TIF estimate. You would know exactly what you're getting. You can go in and amend and designate that taxpayer at any time. It's the same process as establishing the area. So you'd go through those steps, those meetings, but pretty seamless otherwise. And we'd make sure you would go through that process before any revenue was, left on the table.
Anybody else? I can stir it up here pretty quick, so if there's no other questions, I'll make mention of a couple things. First of all, Baker Tilly's our accounting firm. They've been with us so long. I think I remember when I used to let Doug sit on my knee.
I think Matt said 40 years today.
Yeah,
is what he told me.
he was only 6 when he first started coming down here. But they've been around for 3 decades, 4 decades. I don't even remember.
Longer than that.
Tom Broker before that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've been around that long, so I remember when they indeed we were all young people. They're all still young, but I'm not. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Are they coming back at different times to represent to us as things start going?
We can. I mean, they're always a phone call away, and then if we need a presentation, or if we need school, if you will, because, you know, when things really start happening, that might be a good time where we call them in or they Zoom in and we ask them a bunch of questions about what's this going to do for the RDC. The other day, they brought the whole family down from Baker Tilly, and we just reviewed everything that's going on up at the State House and you know, the current state of affairs for the town. It was a really good meeting to be prepared for the future. So I asked a question, and I think it's worth saying out loud, just to be transparent. I asked a question. TIF seems to be one way to control money we can use for specific things. And I'm like, it seems like we may, I mean, I said, can we TIF almost the whole town? I mean, our east side, if you think about it, it's growing as well. And it's commercial, you know, there are some residential area, but in our downtown TIF, it's a limited area, so the residential around it's not even included. And so I just threw the question out there, why aren't we looking at TIFing, say, 46 corridor from Smith down to Hard Street? And so I think, you know, it ought to be an organic thing where we all think it's a good idea, but I just thought I'd mention that was a conversation we had with Baker Tilly the other day.
I think it's reasonable. I mean, I honestly, the west side thing I like, the downtown thing, I always wondered why, I assumed there was something else behind that, why we didn't go further east. But I drive through that all the time, and there's new stuff going up all the time. So I didn't know where we stopped or where we could stop that, but I don't know why you wouldn't want to be prepared for additional growth on the east side of town also.
Trevor might remember this, was about 3 years ago, I asked Baker and Tilly if we could TIF the whole town, if you recall that. And they were told no.
Him and I talked the other day, and I mentioned it, and he goes, "Oh, you mean like I tried to get you to
We were
talk
told
about
no at the time, though, and
3 years ago." So it's an idea that
yes,
could get some
it's been
legs.
a while.
That's about all I got.
I'm all for it.
Yeah, to me, to have downtown and west side makes a lot of sense, but it seems like we're not balanced, considering we're growing across 46 on both sides of town.
Yep.
But again, I think we wanted to get rolling and get a TIF or two started, just get rolling. The other ones we can add at any time, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we just got to come up with a plan and know what we're going to do with the money, and then there's a procedure. Pardon?
Actually, be the town council would get
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't come from the department heads.
yeah.
Right. No, I'm just thinking, I think it's a good thing to discuss. And then back to BDEC, is that correct?
BEDC.
What, give it to me?
BEDC, Bloomington Economic Development
All
Corporation.
right, I was going through my head with that, BEDC. I like what you're saying, and I like what you're talking about with marketing. So instead of reinventing the wheel, how do we make ourselves as an area that's desirable versus just trying to do our TIFs on our own and add this and add that? I'm sure there's studies or companies out there that would meet with our RDC or something we can read or look through where they'll say, here's what you need to do to.
That's what those guys do for a living.
Okay. So we don't need to do that. They just do it for us, or is that something that we should be up to snuff on?
And the town board voted to help support them. And for that, we get highly professional people that can help us with just what you're saying. So it's a really good relationship. We're you know, for a small town, it's an outsourcing where we couldn't afford to have their group as part of our work. You know, we couldn't afford to pay them full-time, but yet anytime something's happening, we have people that are specialized in it. So, I mean, it's not in like Baker Tilly, you know, you have to outsource certain things. We can, and a lot of people specialize in a certain area, and that's when, and it's just like having.
So it's being done. That's what I'm getting. I'm just
Right.
making sure it's being, so it's being done. You're doing it, and then does something come back to you guys at the board, or or something about what they recommend for
An
us to do next?
example That, the tech park they were talking about building, I think that was in Keehee, that Keehee was a project that happened because of the BEDC and us. So, I mean, Mike, by the way, and myself are the two representatives from the town on the board.
Okay.
So, and I can tell you, you know, at first I was like, Bloomington Economic Development Corporation, why are we involved with it? But no, they have been all in on Ellettsville's growth, supporting of the RDC, supporting the TIFs.
The school system.
Yes, yes. We were fortunate to have them because, I mean, one time we talked about having our own economic development person, and I mean, we're like, well, if we can somehow double our income coming in, maybe we'll talk, but they're expensive. We're getting our money's worth, and so I guess the projects would go through planning for, I mean, it would just kind of like any other building. I mean, it would go through here in the TIF. It wouldn't be anything special, would it? I mean, we'd be aware of it, but I don't think we have to approve.
There's been times when I've had large companies approach me or Mike or something, and to get a good comfort level, then we'll contact the BEDC and get them involved to vet them, so to speak, before we go further.
Help us ask the right questions.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, the BEDC also has the data on the available workforce, the educational makeup of the workforce, you know, what, you know, kind of the culture of the company, is it going to fit here? There's so many variables, we wouldn't know what we're not asking. I mean, and,
Well, to put it in perspective, the Keehee was probably the first large project, money-wise and even space-wise, that Ellettsville's ever had. We've had 2 other requests for abatements in the past, and I don't know if one or both of those never come, they never,
one was I think,
One
non-taxable.
came to me, but then they wanted something else, and they were supposed to do a security plan, and they never did, so we never did the other.
so when Keehee is our first foot in the water, I mean, we're new. We never, as somebody famous said, we've never been here before.
Well, no, I like it, because now I know the town is integrated with the people out there looking for development, bringing in. I just knew sitting here at the RDC, I'm like, well, how do I help bring more stuff here? It's already being done, because we're new, we're still establishing this as far as who else. I want to make sure we're all integrated in the right areas versus being separated entities that aren't going to really get the
It's good to ask. I
maximum
mean, if you don't know, it's
Yeah.
good to ask if somebody's watching the
Yep.
gate.
All right, I like it. Awesome. It's good to know.
Sam, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome to
Thanks, Sam.
stay for the next meeting or not.
Do we have, do we need to privilege to the floor? Do we have anything for that today, or is that what we've already done?
That was it.
Anybody else have any comment from the floor? All right, and I guess that being said, we're ready to adjourn our meeting for the Ellettsville Redevelopment Commission for Monday, March 10th, 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.